Alright pilots and future pilots, welcome aboard. My name is Mohammed Adel, and today we're diving deep into a subject that's critically important, yet tragically overlooked by too many. This calculation error has killed more pilots in the last decade than mechanical failures, and most pilots don't even know they're making it. We're not talking about some obscure aerodynamic principle, we're talking about the fundamental math that underpins every single safe flight. If you think you've got a handle on this, I urge you to stick around because what you don't know can and will hurt you. Today we're talking about aircraft performance calculations, the math that keeps you alive. You might think you understand takeoff and landing distances, but there's a deadly gap between what most pilots think they know and what actually happens when physics takes control. Most pilots believe that if their POH says 1,200 feet for takeoff, that's what they need. They glance at it, maybe add a little fudge factor and think they're good to go. They think performance charts are conservative estimates with built-in safety margins, designed by engineers who wear belts and suspenders. But here's the terrifying truth. Those charts assume perfect conditions, perfect technique, and a perfectly maintained aircraft. In the real world, that 1,200-foot takeoff can become 2,400 feet of pure terror, and I'm going to show you exactly why. I'm a flight instructor with over 3,000 hours, and I've analyzed hundreds of performance-related accidents. The patterns are clear, the mistakes are predictable, and the solutions are simple once you understand the science. In this video, I'm going to reveal the 5 critical performance calculations that separate living pilots from statistics. We'll cover density-altitude effects, weight and balance impacts, wind component analysis, runway condition factors, and the performance margins that actually keep you alive. So buckle up because this isn't just another ground school lesson, this is about survival. Let's start with the most misunderstood concept in aviation, density-altitude. This isn't just some academic exercise you memorized for the written exam and then promptly forgot. This is the invisible killer that's claimed more aircraft than bird strikes and engine failures combined. Density altitude is the pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature. Your aircraft's performance is tied to this perceived altitude. Warm air is less dense than cold air. High elevations inherently have less dense air. Combine a hot day with a high-elevation airport, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Your engine produces less power, your propeller is less efficient, and your wings produce less lift. It's a triple whammy against your aircraft's ability to get off the ground and climb. Many pilots make the fatal mistake of underestimating density altitude. Always calculate density altitude and adjust your performance expectations accordingly. Don't let density altitude catch you off guard. Now let's talk about weight, the performance killer that pilots love to ignore, or at least conveniently underestimate. Every extra pound in your airplane is actively trying to kill you, and here's the math that proves it. It's not just about whether you're within the maximum gross weight limit. It's about how that weight, even when legal, systematically degrades every single performance parameter of your aircraft. From takeoff roll to climb rate, cruise speed to landing distance, weight is a relentless adversary. Think about it. To generate lift, your wings need to accelerate a mass of air downwards. The heavier your aircraft, the more lift is required. To get more lift at a given airspeed, you need a higher angle of attack. A higher angle of attack means more induced drag. More drag means you need more thrust to maintain airspeed or to accelerate. More thrust required means your engine works harder, burns more fuel, and has less reserve power for climb or maneuvering. It's a cascade of negative effects, all stemming from those extra few pounds. Most pilots are diligent about calculating weight and balance to ensure they're within the center of gravity envelope, which is crucial for stability and control. But many stop there. They see they're under max gross weight and think, great, we're good to go. But are you really? The performance charts in your POH often provide data for various weights, and the difference between flying at a lighter weight versus at max gross weight can be staggering. That 1,200-foot takeoff roll at a lightweight might become 1,800 feet or more at max gross, even before considering density altitude. Let's look at takeoff performance specifically. A heavier aircraft requires a higher liftoff speed. To reach that higher speed, it needs to accelerate for a longer distance down the runway. This means a longer ground roll. Once airborne, that heavier aircraft will have a shallower climb angle and a lower rate of climb. Obstacle clearance, which might have been a non-issue at a lighter weight, suddenly becomes a critical concern. That tree line at the end of the runway looks a lot closer and a lot taller when you're heavy. It's not just about getting off the ground. In cruise, A heavier aircraft will require a higher power setting to maintain the same airspeed as a lighter aircraft, leading to increased fuel consumption and reduced range. Your service ceiling, the maximum altitude at which the aircraft can maintain a specific rate of climb, will be lower. Maneuverability is also affected. Stall speeds increase with weight. Chapter 3. Wind. It can be your best friend or your worst enemy, and understanding how to calculate its components is absolutely critical for safe takeoffs and landings. Wind component calculations separate professional pilots from weekend warriors. Get this wrong and you'll either hit trees on takeoff or cartwheel down the runway on landing. It's not enough to just know the wind direction and speed from the ATIs or the windsock. You need to break that wind down into its headwind, tailwind component, and its crosswind component. Let's talk about the headwind component first. A headwind is generally a good thing for takeoffs and landings. During takeoff, a headwind effectively increases the airspeed over your wings before you even start moving. This means you'll reach your rotation speed sooner using less runway. Your ground speed at liftoff will be lower and your angle of climb relative to the ground will be steeper, helping with obstacle clearance. It's like getting a free boost. Conversely, a tailwind during takeoff is a performance killer. It means you have to achieve a higher ground speed to reach your rotation airspeed. This translates directly to a longer takeoff roll, sometimes dramatically so. Even a light tailwind of just a few knots can significantly increase your required runway distance. Many PO8s will provide factors for tailwinds, and they are not to be taken lightly. If you have a choice, always take off into the wind, even if it means a longer taxi. For landings, a headwind is equally beneficial. It allows you to maintain your normal approach airspeed while having a slower ground speed. This means a shorter ground roll after touchdown and more control during the flare. A tailwind on landing, however, is exceptionally dangerous. Your ground speed will be higher, meaning you'll float further, and your landing roll will be much longer. Many overrun accidents are a direct result of pilots attempting to land with a tailwind, especially on shorter runways. Now, let's consider the crosswind component. This is the wind that's blowing across the runway, perpendicular to your direction of travel. Every aircraft has a maximum demonstrated crosswind capability, which is listed in the POH. This isn't a limitation that you should aim to test. Exceeding this or even approaching it without being highly proficient can lead to loss of directional control during takeoff or landing. You might drift off the side of the runway, or worse, experience a wing strike or a ground loop. Calculating these components isn't complex, but it requires precision. Chapter 4. Let's talk about the flight computer. It's your lifeline for accurate navigation and fuel planning. Master it or get lost, or worse, run out of fuel. GPS is great, but fundamental calculation skills are irreplaceable. Your backup is your brain, your chart, your watch, and your flight computer. Practice these skills to ensure you're always prepared. Chapter 5. We've talked about density, altitude, weight, wind, and using your flight computer. Now let's tie it all together with the concept that truly separates the professionals from the amateurs, the survivors from the statistics performance margins. Performance charts in your pilot's operating handbook give you minimum numbers under perfect conditions, flown by a test pilot in a brand new, perfectly rigged aircraft. Real flying, in your aircraft by you, requires margins, a buffer that saves lives. Think about the takeoff distance calculated from your POH. Let's say it's 1,500 feet, after accounting for density, altitude, weight, and wind. If the runway is 1,600 feet long, are you comfortable? You absolutely should not be. That 100-foot margin is virtually non-existent in the real world. What if your engine is producing 95% of its rated power instead of 100%? What if your takeoff technique isn't flawless? What if there's a slight, unperceived dip in the runway, or a patch of softer grass? That 1,500 feet can become 1,700 feet in a heartbeat. Professional pilots, whether in airlines or corporate aviation, live by margins. They don't just calculate the required distance, they add significant safety factors. A common rule of thumb in general aviation, often taught as the 50-70 rule or similar, is that if you haven't achieved 70% of your rotation speed by the time you've used 50% of the available runway, you should abort the takeoff. This is a practical application of building in a margin, a decision point. But margins aren't just for takeoff. Consider landing distance. Your POH might say your landing distance over a 50-foot obstacle is 1,200 feet. That assumes a perfect approach speed, a perfect flare, and maximum braking on a dry, paved runway. What if your approach is a little fast? What if you float a bit in the flare? What if the runway is slightly damp? That 1,200 feet can easily stretch to 1,800 feet or more. If the runway is only 2,000 feet long, you're suddenly very close to an overrun. The FAA and aircraft manufacturers provide data based on specific test conditions. Your daily flying conditions are rarely that pristine. Therefore, it's incumbent upon you, the pilot in command, to apply conservative adjustments. For takeoff, many experienced instructors recommend adding at least a 50% margin to the POH calculated distance, especially on grass or rough surfaces, or if high obstacles are present. So, if your POH says 1,000 feet, plan on needing 1,500 feet of runway. For landing, similar margins are crucial. If your calculated landing distance is 1,200 feet, ensure the available runway is significantly longer, perhaps 1,800 or even 2,400 feet, especially if the runway is wet, grassy, or if you're landing at a high-density altitude airport where your true ground speed will be higher. So, there you have it. These aren't just abstract numbers or tedious exercises. Let's recap the 5 performance calculations that keep you alive. First, always calculate density altitude. Your airplane flies in air density, not indicated altitude, and this dramatically affects performance. Second, respect weight limits and understand weight's impact. Every extra pound cascades through all performance parameters, reducing your safety. Third, master wind components. Headwinds help, crosswinds challenge, and tailwinds can kill if not properly accounted for. Fourth, use your flight computer religiously. Accurate navigation, fuel planning, and performance understanding require accurate calculations, not just reliance on GPS. Fifth, build in safety margins. Performance charts show minimums under ideal conditions, not recommendations for your everyday flying. These aren't just numbers on a chart. They're the difference between professional flying and amateur hour, and sometimes the difference between life and death. Every airline pilot, every military pilot, every professional pilot lives by these calculations because they understand that physics doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your experience level or how urgently you need to get somewhere. It simply dictates what your aircraft can and cannot do under a given set of circumstances. Ignoring these calculations is like walking a tightrope without a net. You might get away with it for a while, but eventually, gravity, or in our case, physics, will win. Your homework is simple. Get out your POH, find the performance section, and practice these calculations until they become second nature. Calculate density altitude for your home airport at different temperatures. Work through takeoff and landing distance problems for various weights and wind conditions. Practice wind component problems. Master your flight computer, whether it's an E6B or an app. Remember, there are old pilots and bold pilots, but there are no old bold pilots who consistently ignore the math.